Redditors, who have completely ruined somebody's life, intentionally or by accident, whether they deserved it or not. What happened, and why did you do it? Story 1. Some kid from a forum told me how he wanted to rape his sister and murder his family and a politician. Got the admin of the forum to call the cops on him and arrest him. I was on this tech forum once a few years ago, and some dude got on and was sounding really depressed, so I figured I'd try and talk to him and maybe try to help cheer him up or something. Well, we played a few games of Team Fortress 2 together, and I started to notice he was pretty odd, but nothing too crazy. He was a huge brony, by the way. Well, then we get to talking and he's telling me about himself and how he has some spinal nerve issue or something, and it's very expensive to cure and his family is very poor. Then goes on to talk about how abusive his family is to him, his mother, father, sister, and then this is where it gets fucked up. He starts talking about how much he hates them and how he wished they would die. Now he wants to rape his sister. Yeah. Then goes on to talk about how he wants to slit his father's throat right in front of his mother, and then kill her too. And he starts talking about how he learned to make a bomb and how he was going to try and assassinate a political figurehead. Then he also mentions how he wants to commit suicide by lighting the house on fire while everyone is inside and tied up so they can't escape. Mind you, all of this was explained in very graphic detail. So he finally goes to bed and I immediately message one of the admins from the forum who I was friends with and told him the situation and sent him the chat log and told him to find out where this kid is living and call the cops on him, because this kid is seriously fucked up. After an hour or so, he responds and says, "Holy shit." He told me he called the police, briefed them on the situation, and sent them the chat log and info of the kid. They went out and arrested him. Found a gun under his bed along with some child porn on his PC, and many notes talking about wanting to kill people. Beyond that, the admin didn't hear anything more about it, but the kid was threatening to kill a political figure. Not just a, "Man, I hate this politician." He went into his exact plans on how he was going to do it, so I can't imagine he got off with a stern talking too. I mean, I feel kind of bad for the kid because he obviously had a shitty life, but holy shit, dude. The shit he was talking about was insane. The admin said he almost threw up while reading the rape bit. Hopefully the kid can get help or at least stay in prison so he can't hurt anyone. Story 2. So back in high school shortly after prom, my girlfriend and I wanted to go pick up our prom pictures. For whatever reason that day, my mom didn't want me to go just yet. I remember sitting around the house thinking, why the f can I just go get the shit? I'll be back in less than an hour. Around 2 that afternoon, she finally was cool with me going. But my vehicle, 1989 Ford Bronco XLT on 33-inch Super Swamper tires, that's important later, had tags that expired that month but weren't expired yet. So my mom insisted I drive her minivan. I pleaded to just take mine, but she said I could either take hers and go or not go at all. So I leave and go pick up my girlfriend a few miles away. We're driving to go get them, and she insists we stop to get something to eat. She decided she wanted to eat at Hooters. So we go there for wings. We leave and are back out on the road driving. I was doing 47 miles per hour, and I remember that vividly. All of a sudden, I hear screeching tires, and we both start looking around for where it's coming from. Then about 200 feet, give or take, in front of me, this car comes flying out into traffic, and a guy falls off the side of the car. I say car, but it was a Chevy Tahoe, the kind with running boards. This man falls into the road directly in front of me. We're now less than 100 feet away from him. He's in line with the front of my car, and directly behind him is the rear tire of the Tahoe. I decided that instead of plowing into this dude and then killing him by crushing him between my car and his, I'm just going to swerve into the half-ass emergency lane and try and drive around them because we weren't stopping in time despite my standing on the brake pedal. As soon as I realized I made the worst decision of my life, because I watched in horror as this guy rolled out of the way into the emergency lane. I had just enough time to very clearly and in slow motion watch his eyes dim as he said, "F***." The bumper of the van struck him directly in the face. At that point, he was swept underneath the van, which wasn't even close to high enough off the ground to not drag him. I dragged him underneath the van for approximately another 10 feet, and due to the sidewalk, he was ejected from underneath the van. Time literally stood still for what seemed like an hour as my girlfriend and I just looked at each other, trying to put together exactly what happened. I got out of the car and immediately called 911. I was walking back towards where he was laying on the ground, covered in blood, with multiple contusions to his face, head, torso, arms, and legs. Several bones protruded from his skin, motionless. The woman driving the car gets out and starts screaming, "You've killed my husband! You motherfucking piece of shit!" I'm explaining to the operator on the phone what happened. And then I look up and see a girl I know very well come running through the parking lot the Tahoe drove out of, screaming, "Daddy!" We lock eyes for a few seconds and my mouth drops. We realize we are both friends, and I've just killed my father. Or so we thought. The wife at this point is shaking him violently, screaming, Mike, answer me, baby. You're going to be okay. I start pleading with the woman to please stop shaking him because I'm certain he has a spinal injury, and that could kill him if he isn't already dead. To put it in perspective, one of his arms was twisted completely the wrong way on the wrong side of his body, underneath him. His lower body was also underneath him, and the top of his feet was touching the ground, behind and above his head. The police and EMTs get there, and after speaking to everyone, arrested me. I'm freaking the f*** out because I don't think I've done anything wrong. Turns out the husband and wife were getting a divorce. They had just had an altercation a few days prior where she stabbed him in the leg with a kitchen knife and told him if he ever came around her or their daughter, she would, and I quote, run him over and make sure he died. So the cops assumed I was some quasi-hired hitman that was going to run this poor guy over. They later realized that I had no connection to the parents, and I was released about 30 minutes later. How it all happened was, he showed up at their daughter's work, this animal hospital, and the wife had brought the daughter to work. She goes inside and he confronts his wife who's still in the car. They start arguing and she starts to roll the window up and he jumps on the running boards of the Tahoe. He holds the window down so she can't roll it up. She guns it and starts driving. The parking lot had a ramp type thing that connected the road to the parking lot, but it was a very sharp angle. So when she got to the main road, it flung him to the side of the car. And she slammed on her brakes because she was driving out into a 3-lane highway. Mike is now paralyzed from the neck down, can't speak, and has a colostomy bag, all because I didn't drive my car. If I had driven my truck, he would have rolled and my bumper would still have been easily 3 feet above his head. Would have been a close call, but he would be fine. Part of the reason he can't speak is that when I hit him and he was being dragged into the car, he drags his head up against the sidewalk, like the corner, and it cut a huge notch into his head and brain. I understand from other people he's missing a very large portion of his brain, which leaves him unable to speak, and he has the understanding of like a 3-year-old. This was over 10 years ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I still have trouble driving on that road when I go home to visit my family. The aftermath of that incident I could have never prepared for. I couldn't drive for almost a year. I was just too scared. Even once I started driving again, everything scared the f*** out of me. Is the car next to me slowing down? Better slam on your brakes to be sure. Light changes to green? Why don't you sit there frozen looking both ways for 10 seconds with everyone honking at you? The news. Jesus Christ, the news was the worst part. By the time I finally made it home at around 7 p.m., there were reporters everywhere. All over my street, parked in front of the house, begging to talk to me. They called all day, every day for weeks. It was so horrible. I felt so bad. My girlfriend and I broke up shortly after, and we never ended up picking up the prom pictures. Everything surrounding that day was just destroyed by the fact that my mom didn't let me leave hours before when I wanted to. And that she wouldn't let me take my car. That was probably the worst part from my mother. She blamed herself for years and years. Thankfully, we were all beyond it. I saw their family a few years back in Walmart. I immediately recognized them and tried to turn and make a mad dash down the aisle at Walmart, but didn't do it fast enough. Their son came over and started yelling at me, we're now mid-20s, about how I almost killed his dad. And I'm a worthless f*** of a human being and he hopes I die and burn in hell for what I've done. Now I've ruined their family, and any hope they've ever had of having a normal life. He stormed off and the wife started pushing the husband away in his wheelchair. Their daughter looked at me and said, I'm very sorry about him. They won't ever, but I forgive you. You didn't do anything wrong. It was all just a horrible accident. I hope you've been well. I said I had and thanked her and walked away. Edit. I remembered at one point in the story where he was laying on the ground and she was shaking him while I was on the phone with 911. I remember still being very calm and collected despite there being a dead guy, or so I thought, laying 3 feet from me. This poor man begins to gargle on his own blood and very painfully keeps saying, Help me, please, I don't want to die, over and over. I completely lost my composure and sobbed and was completely inconsolable for over an hour, even after they had picked him up and said despite his injuries, he was expected to live. I remember at that point, I seriously wished I was dead. I wished someone would just walk over and put a bullet in my head. The nice guys that worked at the auto shop next to where this happened let me use the restroom, and one of them gave me a beer and let me sit and smoke about 10 of his cigarettes after everything was over. My dad finally got there, which was pretty nice of them. Story 3. I sent an anonymous tip to the police that this guy had a significant amount of drugs in a hidden compartment in his car, and that he regularly sold them to underage teens. They also tipped him off that he was driving this vehicle around without a valid license in case they needed a reason to pull him over. These tips inevitably led him to being investigated, arrested, charged, and sentenced to a significant number of years in prison, both for the drugs and other things that were discovered about him. Why did I do it? He was in a relationship with a family member of mine for several years, was emotionally abusive and controlling to her throughout. No matter what he did to her, she refused to leave him. Then she discovered he was cheating and confronted him, at which point the abuse turned physical. He became increasingly violent after that. She didn't want to report any of it because she didn't want to start any drama with his family. And she didn't want anyone to know what was going on. Embarrassed or ashamed, I guessed. After a particularly violent incident that put her in the hospital, I thought that if I didn't do something, the next time he would kill her. So I took the information I had that she had confided to me about previously. I found a public computer, and I used it to contact the police. Made sure I included as many details as possible so they'd know it wasn't a joke. Not too long after that, they showed up at his door with a warrant to search his car, and things went on from there. She never put it together that I was the one who alerted the police. I'll never tell her either. A few years after he went away, she met a genuinely great guy who treats her well, and she's happier than I ever saw her. I don't regret what I did at all. I don't know if I'd be able to come to a non-violent resolution with someone that repeatedly physically hurt a family member. Story 4. In middle school, my friend and I really got into catfishing, but back then we didn't know it had a name. We would make fake MySpace profiles and get on chat rooms pretending to be other people. There used to be a cell phone company called Volatile. They had prepaid phones with unlimited texting as long as you had minutes, and you could change your number just by calling and following automated instructions. So we would always talk to all these people pretending to be someone else, and when someone busted us or got too weird, we'd just change our number. Sometimes we would even switch phones over the weekend and pretend to be each other's pretend identities. I don't know why, we were weird dumb kids. Well, my friend ended up with this extra weird dude. She told him she was 15, which was actually 2 years older than she really was. He was a serious pervert and wanted her to do some really weird shit, like send him naked pictures while she was laying in her parents' bed. Pretty much everything he wanted her to do involved sneaking around her parents, like he got off on knowing she could be caught by them at any time. Of course, she never did any of that because he thought she was a petite blonde white girl, but she was really a Native American. Then he starts wanting her to sneak out and meet him. It was more like he wanted to sneak in through a bedroom window and have sex with her while her parents slept in the next room. Like I said, we were f***ing dumbass and decided to take the opportunity to do our own version of To Catch a Predator. But we didn't actually want to meet the guy, so we sent him next door to my mean-ass neighbor's house. He once shot my dog with a BB gun for peeing in his driveway. Was the reason behind our decision. He drove from an area code on the other side of the state, don't know exactly what town he lived in. We turned out all the lights and ran around trying to peek out of the curtains to see, but we never really got a good look. He started calling her phone back to back and we started hearing shouting and then gunshots. It did not come from a BB gun. My parents woke up and we watched the guy get taken away in an ambulance and his truck was impounded. My parents were really freaked out. They thought our neighbor got robbed. I don't know what the guy told my neighbor or the police he was doing there. Never found out anything about it. But I'm going to guess he didn't tell them he was there trying to have sex with a 15-year-old. Not sure if it ruined his life, but I'm sure it f***ed it up quite a bit. This all happened over a decade ago. One thing I know for sure is I'm monitoring my children's online activities. Story 5. When I was 15, I had a teacher send me this long email professing how in love with me he was, in detail, with some graphic content. I went to my favorite teacher, the only adult I was close with, who sent me to the guidance counselor who got the police involved. It turned into a whole undercover sting. I think I'm using that word right. The police, through my email, exchanged emails with him for months. Eventually there was a trial and he went to jail. He had a wife and daughter my age. I still to this day feel awful that he couldn't take her to the ice cream store or his daughter's graduation. Registered sex offender. I think he mostly deserved it, and I'm still glad it happened to me and not somebody who wouldn't have had the strength and support to handle the situation. But a part of me will always secretly feel a little guilty and wonder what if I had just ignored the email. Story 6. When I was 11, I took part in a Judo tournament. It was the fight for the first place and I threw him to the ground, but he fell very wrong, breaking his neck and resulting in him being paralyzed. Saw him a couple of times afterward because he lived in my neighborhood. He never smiled or even looked a bit happy after that incident. There was always this deep sadness in his eyes. 11-year-old me threw the prize for the first place into a nearby lake. It still haunts me to this day. Story 7. During my third year of college, I became extremely close, like family close, with a bunch of my neighbors, guys and girls alike, in my apartment complex. We all hung out almost every night. We would have dinner together all the time and take the bus downtown to the bars multiple nights a week. One night on the bus, we met a guy named Isaac, who was really quiet but friendly enough if engaged in conversation. We invited him to come with us and had a blast drinking all night. It was pretty obvious that Isaac didn't have many friends. He was slightly awkward and new to town. We started inviting him to hang out with us and had a good time with him for a few weeks, until he brought a friend to a party we were throwing. It was a party for a football game and there were probably 30 to 40 people in attendance. I didn't see what actually happened, but Katie, the girl hosting the party, kicked him out. Apparently Isaac and his friend were about to shoot heroin in the middle of the party, and everyone got really bugged out. Over the next few days, Isaac starts texting all of us to apologize for bringing heroin to the party, but everyone was ignoring him. I was the stoner of the group and smoked and hooked Isaac up a few times without the rest of the group. I didn't know what to do. I smoked and drank like any other college student, but I've lost more than a few friends to heroin and didn't want to be associated with it at all. Isaac realized that everyone was ignoring him and started hitting me up like crazy. I'm a pretty nice guy, and I think he figured if anyone out of the group would hang out with him, it'd be me. I felt torn but didn't respond. A few days later, I ran into Isaac downtown between classes, and he tried to make plans to hang out with me. At the time, I didn't have the heart to tell him I wasn't interested in being his friend anymore, so I just told him to hit me up sometime. He did, and again, I ignored him. Fast forward 2 days. Isaac is dead. We never heard what the official cause of death was, but one of our group's girlfriend's cousin's boyfriend or something or other was an emergency responder and said something about a suicide involving heroin in ice-cold bathwater. Whatever happened, Isaac killed himself. He really wasn't a bad guy. This suicide has deeply troubled me over the past 7 years. I've always wondered if I had just reached out to him and tried to help him with his addiction, or just be his friend, maybe he'd be alive. If you read this, thanks. I've only told a few people about this, and it feels good to put it all into drunken words. Story 8. I was the security manager at a club. We took up all drinks at 2 a.m., but were in no hurry to kick people out, so we just let the music play as the crowd dwindled, usually closing at 2:45 to 3. We wouldn't let any new people in though, so I'm at the door, it's 2:30 or so, and 2 guys want in. Keep telling them no, they go from annoying little brats that just aren't used to mommy telling them no, to, yo, we're in the army, dog, we'll f*** you up if you don't let us in. Keep telling them no. One of the bouncers walks up to me from inside and asks if he should start emptying trash cans. I turn to him to tell him yes, then turn back towards the guys to see a fist about 2 inches from my face. A nice sucker punch, and then they bail. That other bouncer and I chased them for probably 3/4 of a mile. We're now away from the bar district in a somewhat residential area. They have a metal fence into someone's backyard and hide under the person's car. We try to goad them into coming out and fighting, but they just sit there. So we call the cops. As soon as the cop car arrives, they try to run. Huge mistake. Cop ends up semi-running over one as he chases him down in his car, then cuffs him. The second one actually couldn't get back over that metal fence at first, so the cop runs back and yells at him to get over the fence, all with gun drawn and pointed. Cuffs the second one. Probably like 2 months later, I finally get a call for the court date. Show up and the DA asks if I want to just drop the charges, since they're just kids. I was also a kid at the time, only like 20. I say no, I would like to press whatever charges possible. Turns out they weren't in the army, but were in the process of applying and doing the tests and all that. One of them cried to the judge, asking for mercy, saying that if anything went on his record, they wouldn't let him in the army. The other bouncer that saw it was there, I was there, and the cop was there for the resisting arrest type charges. The judge told them with 3 witnesses their odds were quite low, so they could either accept charges with probation or go to trial with a jury. They accepted the charges. I assume that means they couldn't join the army, but don't know for sure. I don't think I want people like that issued any M16s. Story 9. I worked as a resident assistant. My rule was to be safe about drinking and sex, but not smoke marijuana on campus because that is an automatic call to the police. No questions asked. Every resident in the building knew this, and if they crossed the line, they would be punished. Winter term rolls around and a suite is smoking, so we call the cops. These poor kids get some of the worst verbal abuse by a police officer. The officer was calling them names, and the worst part about it is that as employees of the university, we had to remain silent and not intervene. In the end, each person was cited with possession. Although that is a misdemeanor crime, it has real-life implications such as fines, associated court fees, and having it appear on your record. One kid who got caught came from a very conservative family where substance abuse was seen as drinking beer, let alone smoking marijuana. This individual was probably removed from school that following week and was never seen again. Although I told every resident that was a rule to not cross, I felt extremely bad for having to enforce it in that particular event. Normally, the officer will confiscate the pipe and drop, never harass and charge. The resident never came back and was apparently working minimum wage in fast food. Story 10. When I was around 6, a friend and I was playing around in my street. He was riding a bike and I had a hockey stick that I was shooting rocks with. I had the brilliant idea that wanted to jam the hockey stick right into my friend's spokes, because that would be hilarious, right? Anyways, he fell, he hit his head. It took him about 10 years to get rid of a stutter he developed that day. Yes, I felt and still feel absolutely horrible. Thank God he has a sense of humor. Story 11. I thought this dude at work stole $40 from me, so I told the manager. It ended up he didn't take it. It was just my mom who borrowed it before I left for work that day and didn't mention it to me. I apologized to the guy. but we work in a grocery store with lots of security cameras, and management kept a close eye on him for that short time. They realized he had been taking boxes of food home. Thing is, the guy is in his early 30s, has 4 kids, and wife who is out of work. The job plus the food he was stealing from the store, which was all he had to support his family, was gone now. He actually got arrested at work and now has a criminal record on top of that. He had about 10 years of seniority at the store and was probably hoping to use that to move up a little bit, all gone within a couple of days. The dude could have avoided arrest but told the manager that it's not a big deal since he'd been stealing for years to support his family. Story 12. I built homes in Juarez and Oaxaca for families that were living in scrap shacks. These regions became even more inundated by cartel violence over the years. Some of these families were murdered by the cartels for their homes. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. That would bother me. Story 13. I was a little too young to be directly involved. I was around 14 at the time, but my parents were involved in having the local drug dealer prosecuted, leading to a downhill spiral for him and his family. By local, I mean he lived next door to us. We were neighbors for around 3 years, and we were fairly certain he had some involvement in drugs due to the smell and the amount of foot traffic going through his household daily. Anyway, we kinda stayed out of it for the most part, because apart from the smell, he was a decent neighbor. He played music loud sometimes and would train his punching bag at fairly stupid times, but would always apologize if we made him aware of it. He always diffused any trouble in our street, due to his stature both physically and likely socially, so it felt like a relatively safe place to be. He had a wife and 2 kids also. That night that really sparked it off was maybe the 10th day in a row of loud music, training until 3 a.m., screaming at his wife, and hearing some fighting between the 2 of them. My parents called the police and they went around to his house that night. They'd been there multiple times in the past, but this time, apparently, they found him in direct contact with drugs. Unfortunately for the family, the police also found that the wife was involved also, so the kids were taken away from them, and both were sent to prison. I've heard since that he's still in prison serving 10 years for various offenses, while she killed herself in prison. My parents don't feel guilty, and neither would I expect them to. It was their own lives they were ruined. And it's not like they didn't know they were already wanted by the police, but the lack of preparation from them for the police visit meant that it all ended for them that night. Story 14. I'm not sure if it was completely ruined, as I didn't see the result, but I know I made life hell for a mentally challenged woman. Her kids get banned from his favorite place, she gets fired from there, and her dad died. She was in a custody battle for her kid, which I'm sure the just fire didn't help that at all. I was her supervisor. My boss hired her for one role and one role only. It was a simple job. Patrol an area, come get staff if you need help type of thing. It started back before I fired her. She was in a relationship with a guy who, from what her caseworker said, was also mentally challenged. He drove to work, so I don't know how challenged he was. They had a kid who was mentally challenged, hyperactive, and prone to temper tantrums like his dad. She brings the kid to work because we are a place for kids to play and have fun. She watches him for a while, then he gets out of the play area. He dips his hand in someone's pitcher of pop, steals some of their pizza, and started interfering with other people's video games. Said the employee now has problems with the boyfriend due to him leaving her for his ex, taunting her, and using the kid as leverage against her. Time passes and she tells me she had to move in with her dad due to her fight with her boyfriend. I talked to her several times about her performance. She wants more responsibility, but I won't ever consider it until she can't get her basic job down. She brings her kid back again. This time she doesn't watch him and he gets out and runs out into the parking lot. One of our managers had to chase him down. The mom was in the back on her cell phone. I told her the kid is banned from coming in. She starts telling me how it was going to crush him and that he can't come back. He's not our problem or responsibility to watch. He is yours. You failed at that, you can't bring him back. Call the owners if you want. I don't care, I'm sticking to this. See you on Saturday for your shift. Saturday comes around, she's clocked on but did do her job. I'm tired of babysitting her and explaining to her how to deal with customers. Pulled her into the office and fired her. She pleaded and I stood my ground. The next weekend she came in to get her paycheck. She told another employee her dad died. Story 15. I confronted my mom when I suspected she was having an affair with an underage boy. She denied it, and my family hated me for causing drama and repeatedly accusing her. Eventually she confessed and went to prison. My dad stood by her. I saw him cry for the first time, but she still treated him like crap. He visited her every single visitation. After being released, she was on strict probation for years. She wasn't able to return to her job. My dad finally divorced her because she was still selfish and always blamed other people for what happened. They had a lot of debt at the time, and now she's impoverished. But she never said sorry or took responsibility for what she did, so I try not to feel too guilty. Story 16. I used to be a bouncer at a local nightclub. Our manager had a policy for fake IDs, where we would keep fakes we found and turn them in for a $5 reward. I never cheated the policy to make money, but I was really aggressive about detecting fakes. Aside from completely fake IDs, there were also the days of laminated ID cards, so people would make cuts in the lamination to alter the number of birth dates. We had a UV light at the entrance, that made cuts stand out nicely and brightly. So one night we got a group of Filipino students, attending a local university, who only had their passports as ID. I started checking IDs, and when I got about halfway through the group and I ran into a pair of obviously doctored birth dates, I made sure that we got pictures of the passports but could not keep them for the reward, because they were technically the property of the Filipino government. I sent them packing and went on with my night. After closing, I brought it up to my boss and made sure he had the pictures. The next day, a cop stopped by, regular visit, not specifically because of the passports. My boss handed over all the fakes we collected over the previous few days and gave him the pictures of the doctored passports. About a week later, the cop stopped back in to say hello and told us that the students with the doctored passports had been deported. It is my understanding that, at least at the time, 1995 to 6, many of the Filipino college students in my area were here on the Filipino government's dime, that there was a very good chance that getting deported resulted in them being required to pay the government back for whatever was spent, to put them in an American university up to that point. Basically, I did my job, but it resulted in 2 kids being sent back home, where there was a good chance that they'd be in some form of indentured servitude to the government for a good chunk of the rest of their lives. Story 17. Was in a small, close-knit engineering program. There was a lot of cooperation, as was permitted and encouraged. In our 3rd year, we collectively realized that there was a cabal of students, about 8 or so, who were parasiting the rest of us. Each would obtain parts of assignments here and there from everyone else, contributing nothing in return. They'd then compile it together and turn it in as their work, having done nothing at all. What should have been the nail in the coffin was when a friend, who was a teaching assistant for one of our courses, showed me the latest assignments he was grading. There were photocopies, clear copies, as evidenced by the identical hair copied across the first goddamn page of every one of them. When presented to the professor and the dean, they took no action, so we took action. We waited until partway through our final year to do anything at all, and we all started feeding them bad answers or nothing at all. Having learned little in the previous years in the program, they were unable to fill in the gaps. They failed nearly every class. Their grades crashed hard enough that most were not permitted to return. They were tossed out in their asses with 4 years of student debt and no degree. When you cheat in school, you cheat yourself. Fake it till you make it, or in this case, till you get thrown out in your ass. Story 18. He raped my wife when she was a child for many years. Her parents never did anything about it when they found out, when she was in her teens. She went to the local police in Vermont once, while in college, and nothing happened. Fast forward to when we fell in love. I told her that it was up to her, but if she ever wanted to go after him, I would do it all. All the legwork, anything, but no pressure. It couldn't come from me, it had to come from her. She said yes. I went to the local police in her hometown, nothing. I went to the DA of the county, nothing. I politely let them know I run a PR company and would be opening a full campaign regarding the lack of even beginning a rudimentary investigation. I got a call back. We met, talked, they interviewed him and some others. Some things didn't add up. They served a warrant, some things were found. He ran to Russia with his girlfriend, he's not Russian. We hunted him down to a village in southeastern Russia. I spent considerable resources but brought him back. He's in jail now, awaiting trial. His wife killed herself. His kid ostracized him. He raped an 8-year-old for 5 years, at least one. Fuck him. I hate that he hurt so many people in his life and that they're part of this. But that's on him. I've never looked him in the eyes, but in February I will, and he will know who hunted him. Story 19. I have something I will forever feel guilty about, although I honestly wonder whether or not what happened to my old friend is my fault. Growing up, I had one friend, a Stifler type, but still a very close friend. One of my closest, if not the closest friend for sure. But like I said, he was a dick. I always knew it. Would call him out on it all the time and was even sort of bullied by him to an extent sometimes. But still, we were really good friends. And it's actually unfair to paint him like an abusive friend because while he was a dick, we were dick back. No one ever felt like he was mean or anything. We just had this general sense of him being an idiot. But in reality, we knew there was something more off about him. So as we get older, our patience runs thin, and he gets progressively worse. As things with his mother and his stepfather worsen, he gets worse. Finally, when that culminated in divorce, his family was hit hard financially, and he became much worse. We became less and less willing to deal with it. So one night he says something rude. Not sexually rude, just normal rude, to a friend of ours. This was sort of a newish friend, and he didn't have any real connection with Stifler, and so he wanted nothing to do with him. And so out of nowhere, we just deaded him entirely. We cut ties completely, wouldn't pick up his calls, and then would pick up after like a million times and make up some bullshit about why we can't hang out, which just makes it worse. Then we would see him around from time to time, and he would get aggressive with us. We would get aggressive back, and now there was this legit beef, like he wanted to beat the shit out of us, and vice versa. We would hear things about him through our friends of ours that were still acquainted with him, and he became very depressed, in a manic schizo way. Very violent, delusional, and broke. He ended up being institutionalized for a short while. He was released about 4 months ago. And around late July, my friend showed me a Facebook post of his that read, "Help 911. This is a life or death situation. Do any of you know about time or space travel?" Now, I don't know that we can really say a guy who clearly had issues from the start was made that way by us. We all knew that and laughed at it basically. It was that crazy friend that was always fighting and driving at 100 miles per hour on the highway. To us, our only concern was that sometimes he annoyed us. And when we just felt like the allure of our friendship had faded, we dropped like we were never really friends. Meanwhile, we were really close. We hung out nearly every day, had sleepovers in junior high and all that shit. Story 20. Simply put, she started it. I long suspected that my live-in girlfriend was cheating on me, but I could never prove it. She was entirely dependent on my job to pay the rent and get her groceries. She worked as a waitress in a small failing diner. So basically, her coworker told me after a night when my girlfriend said she was going to party with her, now I was trying to find her by calling her cell phone, to which no avail, that she came over and left for home, presumably to me, with another guy. Boom. Gotcha, bitch. I had already been cheated on in the last 2 long-term relationships, so it was pretty hard for me to invest emotionally in people. So this was going to be easy, right? Well, sorta. Before I left for work that day, I finally got a call back from my now, unbeknownst to her, ex-girlfriend. I asked her how her night was with her friend and if she'd be home before I got back from work. She said she stayed the night with her friend, lie, that she'd be home an hour or so after I left. To which I reply, and I'm paraphrasing here, "Good. That way you can pack your shit up and not be there when I get home from work. I know you didn't stay at your friend's house last night." She tried to explain, but I wasn't hearing it. I just told her to not be there when I got back. She finally admitted to doing something wrong, but she never would say what. But I knew, and knew she knew, and she knew that I knew that she knew. So when I got home, all of her stuff was gone, which wasn't too much to begin with. I do suspect her of also stealing most of my CDs. The part of this whole story was that she was a college student. She couldn't get into the dorms, couldn't afford it, couldn't afford an apartment. The person she was sleeping with on the side had a girlfriend, a real winner. So she couch surfed for a few weeks, trying to make it to the end of the semester, with her friend who got her busted until she got kicked out for not doing her part. She had to leave college. I don't know the specifics, and moved back across the country to live with her parents. I don't think she ever finished college. I don't know if this really ruined her life, but it sure as altered it. You didn't ruin her life. She ruined her own life. Story 21. I was in a car accident about 3 weeks after I got my license. Completely my fault, and I almost died. A lot of people were involved, but only one other was hurt. A 20-something-year-old lady broke her wrist. She was a tennis player. I believe she coached locally but had dreams, unsure how viable, but potential of going pro. She had competed. I think about her a lot. I don't know her name or anything like that, just that I ruined her future. I think she can play tennis still, but I've shot her chances of ever going pro. I think she attempted to sue me, but I was 16 and my mother was broke, so it was quickly dropped. She didn't deserve it. I wasn't drinking and I wasn't speeding, but I also wasn't paying attention. I'm lucky I didn't kill anybody, or myself, but I always lived with the fact that my carelessness ended her dreams. Story 22. When I was in high school, I had a lot of mental health issues. I also was extremely terrible at school, but I was a good kid for the most part. Anyways, my school was newly built in my first year of grade 9. Every kid was new, and all the young teachers were fresh out of school. Well, my careers teacher, we'll call him Mr. Noodles, was a good-looking, young 20s English career civics teacher. I guess because he was new, he really wanted to make a difference with kids. He was absolutely fantastic to teach and great with students. He offered to give me tutoring lessons as he saw how my marks were doing. I took him up on it, because he was nice and understood my educational needs. Skip ahead, I've been doing this for a few months now, staying late at school once a week. The problem occurs when a guy from my class kissed me while we were both pretty drunk. His girlfriend now has a hate for me, spreading rumors and a ton of terrible things. One is that I am sleeping with Mr. Noodles. It finally reaches the ears of other teachers and many students. I got pulled into the principal's office and asked a ton of questions about how often I hung out with Mr. Noodles and what our actions were. Since nothing happened, I told them about him helping me. I'm from a small town. This stuff spread like crazy. The school asked him to leave. I never saw him again after I got pulled into the office. My hope is he got to go to another school, but I fear that people knew and he'd get rejected. Mr. Noodles, if for some strange reason you read this, thanks for helping me. You were the only person who cared and life was really shitty when you had to leave. You were a fantastic teacher. Story 23. I reported someone to animal control for bestiality. She posted photos of herself performing sex acts on her dog on a popular bestiality website. The dog in question was very distinctive looking, and she got that particular dog from the animal shelter where she was a regular long-time volunteer. The shelter was operated by the sheriff's office. Needless to say, the shelter staff and the officer I spoke to recognized the dog in the photos, and hit the fan for her. She was well known enough in some internet circles that there was a huge thread in one of those forums like B or 4chan about her, complete with archived versions of the photos. At first, she tried the deleting everything tactic and purged all of her accounts, but I guess people actually forwarded the photos to her parents. At one point, one of her close friends posted this big whiny tirade about how being exposed as a zoophile had ruined her life. I was the first person to contact law enforcement about it. She was investigated for animal cruelty, but no charges were ever filed because it wasn't technically illegal in her state. But the animal rescue community is pretty tight-knit, so she's probably pretty notorious there. She's self-employed and has a somewhat distinctive name. When you Google her name, the first result is her website. The very second result is a long, detailed, well-documented thread about her extracurricular canine activities. Right. So how again did you find these pictures again?